Thomas always considered himself a rational person. A skeptic to the core, he didn't believe in mysticism, paranormal phenomena, and other nonsense, as he called it. But everything changed when he received a strange inheritance from a distant relative he hadn't even known existed. The inheritance turned out to be an old house on the outskirts of a small town, surrounded by dense forest. The house looked like it hadn't been cared for in many years, peeling paint, broken windows, creaky floors. Thomas, being pragmatic, decided he would simply sell the house and forget about this adventure. When he first entered the house, he was immediately overwhelmed by a strange feeling. The air was filled with the smell of age and decay, and the silence was so dense it seemed you could cut it with a knife. In one of the rooms, he found an old diary, its pages yellowed and brittle with time. Out of curiosity, Thomas began to read. The diary belonged to a woman named Evelyn who had lived there many years ago. She described her life in the house, mentioning strange sounds she heard at night and visions that haunted her in the dark corners of the rooms. With each page, the diary became increasingly grim and disturbing. One night, while reading the diary, Thomas heard a faint creak. He looked up and saw that the door, which he was sure he had closed, was slowly opening by itself. Entering the hallway, he noticed a shadow flickering at the end. Deciding it was just his imagination, Thomas returned to reading. On the next page, Evelyn described how she discovered a mysterious door in the basement that she hadn't noticed before. Thomas immediately headed to the basement, where he indeed found the door. It was locked, but the key from the diary fit perfectly. Behind the door was a dark passage leading down. With each step down the stairs, he became more frightened. The air was cold and damp, and the walls seemed to close in on him. At the end of the passage, he found a small room with an ancient altar and an old book on it. The book was written in a language he didn't recognize. When he touched the book, the room was filled with a bright light, and he felt something invisible pass through him. Struggling to open his eyes, he saw a woman in old-fashioned clothes standing before him. She looked at him with pleading eyes, her mouth silently whispering words he couldn't understand. Thomas, gripped by panic, ran back to the stairs, but an invisible force blocked his way. Suddenly, he realized he couldn't move. In his ears, he heard Evelyn's voice, begging him to free her soul. With each word, it became harder for him to breathe. The last thing he remembered was his body becoming motionless and his consciousness plunging into darkness. He woke up in a hospital. The doctors said they found him unconscious in the house, which was soon to be demolished. They said he had been there for several days, but Thomas was sure it had only been a few hours. Returning home, he decided to forget about everything. But at night, he began to hear whispers and see silhouettes in the corners of his apartment. They became more distinct until one night he saw Evelyn before him. She looked at him with her empty eyes and reached out as if she wanted to take him with her. The next morning, he was found dead in his apartment. His face was twisted in horror, and he was clutching the same ancient book, which no one could explain how it ended up with him. Now the whispers and shadows haunt the new tenants, and no one knows when they will stop. The rain was pounding on the roof of the abandoned house like a drumbeat, drowning out any other sounds. Anna stood by a broken window, looking at the overgrown garden where tall trees swayed under the gusts of wind. Her companions, Mike and Steve, had spread out a map on a dusty table, discussing their plan for the night ahead. Around them was only darkness and the unknown lurking in every corner of the old building. Anna had come here to spend a few days alone, but accidentally stumbled upon an old legend about a ghost that haunted this house. According to the legend, the ghost belonged to a young woman brutally murdered many years ago. Since then, her spirit wandered the house, and anyone who entered risked facing her terrible curse. "Do you think it's true?" Mike asked, glancing at Anna. Anna shrugged. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she was intrigued by the idea of investigating the legend. The night was just beginning, and they decided it would be interesting to do a little exploring. They climbed to the second floor, where the room was located, in which the tragedy supposedly occurred. The door creaked open, revealing thick dust and shadows that seemed to have remained motionless for centuries. Anna cautiously entered first, feeling the cold seeping under her skin. Suddenly, she noticed something on the floor, an old mirror with cracked glass. "Look," she said, picking up the mirror. "It seems to have been here for a long time." Mike and Steve came closer. In the reflection, they saw not only their faces, but something strange behind them. It was like a shadow moving through the room. "What was that?" Steve asked fearfully, stepping back. Anna didn't have time to answer when the mirror slipped from her hands and shattered into small shards. The room filled with a strange smell, and they heard a quiet but distinct whisper. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, leaving them in complete darkness. "We need to get out of here," Mike whispered, his hands trembling as he tried to find a light switch. But there was no light. They groped around, trying to find an exit, but the room seemed larger than before. Every movement was accompanied by strange sounds, as if someone invisible was walking next to them. Anna felt her heart beat faster. She couldn't understand what was happening, but instinctively knew they needed to leave. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed. They turned and saw a figure in white appear in one of the room's corners. It was a woman with hollow eyes and bleeding wounds on her body. Her gaze was full of pain and hatred. "Why did you come here?" Her voice echoed, reverberating in every corner of the room. Anna couldn't utter a word. Her body was paralyzed with fear. The woman approached, each step accompanied by a painful moan. Mike and Steve also couldn't move, as if their feet had grown roots into the floor. "Leave," the woman whispered, coming closer. Anna made a desperate attempt to run out of the room, but the door wouldn't budge. She heard her companions trying to help, but to no avail. The figure in white was already very close. Anna felt cold hands touch her shoulder. A thought flashed through her mind that this was the end. But suddenly everything stopped. The light returned, the door flew open, and the figure disappeared. Anna, trembling, turned to see Mike and Steve standing in shock, not understanding what had happened. They ran out of the house without looking back and swore never to return. The next morning, when they returned to the car to leave, Anna noticed a strange mark on her shoulder, a handprint that wouldn't wash away. She realized that the house hadn't let her go completely. From that day on, she was haunted by nightmares, and each time, the same woman appeared in them, the ghost with hollow eyes and bleeding wounds. Years passed, but Anna couldn't rid herself of this curse. At some point, she decided to return to that house to end the nightmares. When she entered the familiar room, the woman was already waiting for her. "You came," the familiar voice echoed. "Now it's your turn." Anna realized she had been a part of this terrible story from the very beginning. The room filled with light, and when it disappeared, Anna was gone. The legend of the ghost of the abandoned house now included a new victim, and now two spirits roamed the old house, waiting for new curious visitors.